John Mitchell, a lonely 60-year-old Canadian retiree, thought he had found salvation when he married 26-year-old Anika Sharma from India, but what began as a promise of love soon unraveled into betrayal, rage, and a shocking murder that would grip an entire nation. John Mitchell had spent most of his life behind the wheel of a truck, driving across Canada's endless highways. At 60, retirement left him with long, empty days and an ache of loneliness that grew heavier after the loss of his wife 2 years earlier. His children were grown, busy with their own lives, and although they checked in now and then, John mostly spent his evenings in silence. The house, once filled with the comfort of routine, now echoed with emptiness. Out of desperation for companionship, he turned to online matchmaking services, a decision that would alter his life in ways he could never have predicted. Through one of these services, he met Anika Sharma, a 26-year-old woman from India. She was strikingly beautiful, with long black hair, warm eyes, and a polite way of speaking that immediately drew him in. She spoke of her dreams of a happy marriage, of building a life with a caring husband, and of her desire to start a family in Canada. Her words touched a vulnerable part of John, making him feel seen and valued again after years of grief. Despite the wide gap in their ages, he convinced himself that love was not bound by numbers, but by intentions. Their online conversations quickly turned into video calls, and before long, John traveled to India to meet her in person. He was treated with kindness by Anika and her relatives, who seemed eager to see her married to a man who could give her security abroad. John believed he had finally found someone who would stand by his side in his twilight years. The wedding was small but colorful, filled with traditional rituals he didn't fully understand but cherished, because they made him feel part of something bigger again. When Anika arrived in Vancouver after the paperwork was completed, John's neighbors were stunned. Some whispered about the vast age difference, while others congratulated him, saying he was lucky to find love again. John brushed aside the doubts, proudly introducing Anika as his wife. For him, it felt like a new beginning, a second chance at the happiness he thought had died with his first partner. Anika adjusted quickly to her new environment, smiling as she explored Canadian life, signing up for language classes and taking photos everywhere they went. John believed her excitement was a sign of her love for the life they were building together. He never suspected that beneath her charm and warmth, there could be a purpose far more calculated than affection. At that time, he only saw her as the answer to his prayers, never as the reason his future would one day spiral into tragedy. The first few months of marriage seemed to bring stability, but it didn't take long before John began noticing changes that unsettled him. At the beginning, Anika had been affectionate, often staying by his side and showing gratitude for the life he had given her. She cooked with him, went on walks, and appeared eager to blend into his world. Yet as weeks turned into months, her behavior shifted in ways he couldn't ignore. She grew distant, preferring to spend time outside the home rather than with him. What started as short outings for shopping or classes became long absences that stretched late into the evening. John tried to be understanding, convincing himself she was simply adjusting to a new culture. He told himself she needed friends her own age, people she could relate to better than him. Still, there were moments that left him uneasy. She began guarding her phone with unusual caution, keeping it close to her body at all times. If a message came through, she would quickly tilt the screen away. Calls were often taken in another room with the door shut, leaving John in silence and doubt. Friends who had congratulated him at first started voicing concerns. They pointed out how young she was, how her sudden independence seemed unusual for a new bride. Some even suggested she might have married for reasons other than love. John bristled at these comments, feeling protective of her and embarrassed by the implication that he had been fooled. He told himself age differences naturally created gaps in lifestyles and interests, but deep inside, the unease grew heavier. His suspicions intensified when Anika began to withdraw physically as well. The warmth she once showed in their private life faded into excuses about being tired or busy. She poured her energy into attending social gatherings, joining community groups, and focusing on immigration appointments. John, who had hoped for companionship and shared moments, felt increasingly like a background figure in her life. One evening, while searching for a document in her drawer, John stumbled across a folder filled with immigration papers. At first, he thought nothing of it, until he noticed the dates. They were signed and prepared before she had even met him, showing clear intent to apply for permanent residency in Canada. His chest tightened as he flipped through the pages, realizing she had been planning her future long before their marriage. The timing was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. For the first time, John's trust wavered, and a dark seed of doubt took root in his heart. John could no longer ignore the unease that gnawed at him daily. The discovery of the immigration documents had shaken him, but he wanted proof before confronting Anika. He told himself that perhaps he had misunderstood, that maybe the paperwork was part of routine procedures. Yet his instincts told him otherwise, and those instincts pushed him to quietly watch her more closely. At first, he checked her phone when she left it unattended, but Anika rarely did. One night, while she slept, he finally managed to unlock it. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Buried in her messages was an ongoing conversation with a man back in India. The exchanges were intimate, filled with affectionate words and future plans. They spoke of reuniting once her permanent residency was secured, as though John never existed in their world at all. Each message John read pierced him deeper, turning his lingering doubts into certainty. He was not a husband, but a stepping stone. The betrayal was more than he could bear. He had given her a home, stability, and his heart, only to discover he had been used. Every smile she offered, every polite gesture, now seemed like part of a carefully crafted performance. He began to see patterns in her behavior, her late nights, her secrecy, her sudden distance, that all connected to this hidden truth. It was as if his entire marriage had been built on a lie designed to crumble once her goals were achieved. John's heartbreak quickly twisted into humiliation. He imagined the whispers of neighbors who had once envied his luck, now mocking him behind closed doors. He thought of his children, who had been skeptical from the start, shaking their heads in quiet judgment. The shame of being deceived at such a vulnerable point in his life burned him more than the loneliness he had once endured. His mind became consumed with dark thoughts. Instead of focusing on the love he had lost, he replayed every moment of deceit, every conversation that now carried hidden meaning. The image of Anika laughing with friends or texting late into the night filled him with anger so powerful he could hardly control it. He started imagining confrontations, picturing himself demanding the truth from her, but confrontation no longer seemed enough. The betrayal had cut too deeply, and his thoughts drifted towards something irreversible. In the quiet of his home, John realized he was no longer simply hurt. He was a man teetering on the edge of rage, ready to do something he could never take back. The night it all came crashing down was cold and wet, rain streaking against the windows as John sat alone in the dimly lit living room. For hours he had been rehearsing what he would say, staring at the stack of evidence laid out on the table, the immigration documents, the printouts of her messages, the photos that made his stomach twist with disgust. Each paper felt like a knife pressed against his pride. He had imagined this confrontation countless times, but tonight the weight of betrayal was too heavy to ignore. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the storm of emotions raging inside him, grief, anger, and humiliation blending into something far darker. When Anika finally walked through the door, her umbrella dripping with rain and her phone clutched in her hand, John's chest tightened. She looked carefree, even cheerful, as though her world was untouched by the storm brewing in his. Without a word, he gestured to the table where the evidence lay. Her smile faltered as her eyes landed on the documents, the messages, the undeniable proof of her lies. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of rain. She didn't deny it, didn't rush to explain. Her face hardened, and that silence was all John needed to confirm what he already knew. Something inside him snapped. All the months of suspicion, all the nights spent questioning himself, all the humiliation of being deceived, everything ignited at once. His gaze fell upon the heavy brass candlestick that sat on the shelf, a decorative piece from his late wife's collection. He had passed by it 1,000 times without thought, but now it felt like an answer to the storm tearing him apart. In a blur of rage, he grabbed it. The weight felt solid, final, and before he could think, he brought it down. The first blow stunned her, her phone falling to the carpet with its screen still glowing. The second ended the scream that had begun to escape her throat. He struck again and again, each motion driven by pain that had been festering for months. When the fury subsided, the room fell into silence once more. Anika lay motionless, her life extinguished in the same home where he had once dreamed of finding peace. John dropped the candlestick, staring at his blood-stained hands. The man who had once longed for nothing more than companionship was now standing over the body of the woman he thought would save him. Realizing there was no turning back from what he had just done, John sat frozen on the couch, his breath shallow and uneven as the reality of what he had done settled around him like a suffocating fog. The house was silent except for the faint buzz of Anika's phone, its screen still lit with unread messages from the man she had planned her future with. The evidence of betrayal and the brutal act of violence lay scattered across the living room. He tried to gather his thoughts, to make sense of the chaos, but his mind refused to settle. Panic surged through him, pushing him into clumsy attempts to erase what had happened. He wiped at the blood on the carpet, dragged Anika's body toward the hallway, and tried to wash his hands until his skin was raw. But every movement was sloppy, guided by fear rather than reason. Neighbors had long noticed the tension in the Mitchell house. That night, one of them reported hearing strange noises, heavy thuds that did not match the calm of an ordinary evening. When the police arrived, John was sitting on the couch again, his clothes stained, his eyes hollow and vacant. The candlestick lay nearby, unmistakable as the weapon. Anika's body was discovered only steps away, her phone still glowing beside her as if mocking the finality of the scene. John made no attempt to resist when officers led him out. The man who once craved love and companionship walked out of his home in silence, now branded as a murderer. The trial that followed gripped the nation. The story of an aging Canadian man deceived by a young wife in pursuit of immigration dreams stirred both outrage and sympathy. Prosecutors painted John as a man who let jealousy and anger consume him, turning into a killer the moment he lost control. The defense argued he had been manipulated, tricked into a sham marriage, and driven to the edge by betrayal. Testimonies from friends and neighbors revealed how quickly his marriage had crumbled, how trust had dissolved into suspicion. The jury saw a man destroyed by his own rage, and the verdict was clear. John was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Behind bars, John had all the time in the world to replay his choices. He had wanted love, peace, and a second chance at happiness. Instead, he ended up with loneliness deeper than before, haunted by the memory of a young woman whose lies had set the stage for tragedy. What began as hope ended as horror, leaving behind a story that warned others about the dangers of deception, desperation, and misplaced trust.